Welcome. Let's see. Session. Yeah. So welcome to today's session on our career advancement series from the Burke Neurological Institute's Office of Postdoctoral Advancement. So I'm the Postdoctoral Advancement Advisor, Edmund Hollis, for those of you downtown that don't know me. And today we're going to hear from DeAnna Adkins, Dr. DeAnna Adkins. She's going to talk to us about her career path. Her title is called Navigating the Unclear Path. Dr. Adkins did her PhD at the University of Texas in Austin with Teresa Jones, where she studied electrical stimulation and cortical plasticity. She then moved on to Jeff Klime's lab for postdoctoral research at the University of Florida and studied plasticity and stroke. So these are topics that are very near and dear to us here at Burke Neurological Institute, and hopefully some of you downtown as well are interested in the nervous system and all the responses to injury. So then she went back to Austin for a brief postdoctoral fellowship and a step up to research assistant professor. Many of you may be aware of the intermediate paths that you have towards scientific independence. And she established her own independent lab in 2011 at the Medical University of South Carolina in Charleston as an assistant professor, where she studied stroke, rehabilitation and plasticity, and also some work on astrocytes and mitochondria. She was there for 7 years, where she advanced through the ranks as an associate professor before she departed for the NIH, for NINDS, to work as a scientific review officer. And there she oversees standing committee on the postdoctoral mentor training grants. And that's where she's been brought to our attention, her work with the NINDS and postdoctoral fellowships. So today we're going to hear from her. If you have questions, please feel free to ask. I'll monitor the chat. If anybody wants to write it up or raise your hand, I'll monitor. But otherwise, feel free to interrupt and ask questions as we go along. Again, this session is being recorded, and if you could please leave yourselves muted during the seminar, unless you have a question, that would be appreciated. All right. So thank you very much, and welcome, Dr. Adkins.
Thank you, and thank you for the introduction and for the invitation. So just one morning, and then I'll get started. I have about 20 people in my yard right now doing some construction. They have access to the house to use the restroom. You see me, or if you can see me, I may have to run out and deal with some emergency and come back. Hopefully not planned this way. Okay. So I'll get started. Feel free to interrupt me. The first part of this talk will be more biography, and hopefully through it, you'll pick pieces out that may or may not apply to you. But at the end, I really want to just open it up to your questions, because everybody's past, everybody's vision of their future, everybody has their own way through the process of growing up, right? Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Let's hope that, and as you'll notice already, the title has changed. This is not uncommon for me. I like to change things up. I get bored easily. And so as you'll see that in the following slides. Let's see. Okay, so I actually was starting way back before my science education, because it actually influenced kind of why everything. I called this the unseen path, or not really knowing what I'm doing. I grew up in Las Vegas, Nevada, which is probably the most interesting thing about me, to COPS. So I was a first generation college graduate. Neither of my siblings went that way. And I started out thinking I was going to be a poet or a writer, philosophy, some crazy stuff. So science was not on my radar. I took the courses so I could get into college, and that was it.
DeAnna? Deanna, real quick, it's been requested. Can you move your microphone a little bit closer to your mouth?
Yes.
I think
is that
I can
better?
hear you. It's a little bit quieter. Go ahead.
All right. Is that better?
It is on my end. And then Sage and people in the conference room, if you can just turn the volume up a bit, that would probably help.
And if you need it louder, I can also go in and turn up. Give me 1 second. I'll turn up my volume here too. All right. That's about a 25% increase. Hopefully that is sufficient. But if not, let me know. Okay, so starting out, no, science was nowhere in my purview. My biology class, we actually did Ouija boards because we were in an honors class and we were allowed to do whatever we wanted, and we were making a movie. And so that's what I did in biology. Um, so when I got to ASU, where I went to college, I chose this place because it was in a driving distance from my home and was under a certain price limit since I had very little money. My parents were, blue collar. Um, so I found the Honors College, which was amazing. It became a little refuge in a big university. But while I was there, I was taking gender studies and humanities and philosophy, kind of that same theme. Again, science was, oh, those people don't know how to think and we need to free our minds, all that crazy stuff. And as you are, so when I decided to graduate, I basically counted up my credits, and that's how I chose my major and why I have a degree in history is because I had most of the credits in history. My roommate was leaving, so I had to leave. But I was able to write a thesis. And this kind of tells you the flavor of the research I was doing at the time, which was slaves of the uterus, 19th century women in this. So this is where my head was for a very long time. After graduating, I actually decided to stay and I became an academic advisor, which was great. And I knew I loved education. I um, loved seeing other people's ideas come to fruition. And so in this position, I could do that and still take all the courses in humanities and crazy stuff, sci-fi reading for fun. Yes. So I did that, but I also wanted to go to grad school and I wanted a PhD. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to move forward. So I went to University of Chicago for a master's thesis where I got to build my own degree. So in that interim between getting my history degree and going to University of Chicago, I discovered science magazines with pretty pictures of brains. Right when fMRI was coming out, this was decades and decades ago. I mean, we barely had search engines for, right, so long time ago. Um, I started realizing that the questions I was asking in philosophy and in history, which was why do people do things? How do people change the way they see the world? Could maybe be answered with science with pretty pictures, right? fMRI. So I started searching for a way that I could get some of that science background and not have to go hardcore, right? So I asked for advice, and people were telling me I had to take calculus and physics and all this stuff. And I was like, no, I want a different way there. So at the University of Chicago, I was able to take courses in biopsychology and as well as taking all the courses I needed to for my master's, um, which then led to my thesis again, still kind of in the same theme, but there's a slight difference. Um, and that thesis was deconstructing the two-sex system. So I really looked at how society created gender and sex and how science may or may not support other visions. However, when it was written, I was still in this, I was not a well-trained scientist, and I really still thought of science as something outside of my existence. And so it was a little bit of a pushback at some of the science, which is great when you go back to early 18th century literature, science literature. Fantastic. You get to literature, it's a little more difficult. But what this gave me was an opportunity to take courses to shift the way I was looking at the questions I cared about, which again was this bigger amorphous Why do people do things? How do you change things? Why do we come up with these definitions? This makes more sense in a longer conversation. It's really boring and self-aggrandizing, so you can just ignore it. Um, so after this, after getting my master's degree in a year, I was burned out. And so I decided just to move to Seattle because why not? My roommate, the one who helped me decide what I was going to graduate as, moved up there. So I went up there. I was a receptionist for a very long time. It was horrid. Um, and I was then, but in that, as a receptionist, I got to know people and became a research assistant for our environmental health um, department, where I was basically doing some psychology testing, and then I actually was gathering urine samples and things and on site and blood samples without training. And nowadays you wouldn't get away with that, but I was doing taking or transferring urine samples in a bathtub of a hotel for one of our studies. Not, I don't suggest doing that. Um, it was pretty horrid, but being there, getting that research, I was able to take free class. So I took intro neuroscience courses at a graduate level and chemistry and different things. Basically, going back to what people told me to do a couple years ago, start getting some of the basic science in there. I finally listened to them and was able to. I met my graduate mentor, Teresa Jones, at UW. Um, Took her class, begged her to let me into her lab, and then she talked me into applying for graduate school, and I was accepted. So I started my graduate training at UW in behavioral neuroscience. So still not quite the neuroscience I ended up in, but kind of a more psychology flavor, but doing the same research that I did. Hold on, sorry. Then she decided about the end of my second or third year, after I'd finished all my coursework, I was building my committee, that she was moving back to UT Austin, where she graduated from. The way this happened was she came into lab. Oh, I have something to tell you. And I looked at her, I'm like, as long as we're not moving to Texas, I'm with you. Obviously, Texas, I too ended up being into. And it was a great experience. My partner at the time and I had only been dating 2 months, which was fine. And I said, well, I'm going. If you want to come, come. He did. We've been married 20 years now. I mentioned him because he's the reason I bounced back and forth a couple jobs, uh, partially. Um, when we got to U Texas, I started over all my coursework. And I know for many people, this would have been really deflating and hard, but for me, it was almost like a restart. Um, I was able to get finally slough off all the remaining images of myself I had before of not being sciencey enough and actually just the work. And I dove deep into it. I loved being her first graduate student there. So I got to set up the lab. I got to be the um, graduate student that everybody came to for questions and I got to answer. So I got to do all those things I love doing, helping others, being my mentor's right hand person and be there from the beginning. And so it was a great experience. I showed this because even though the rats that I used to train became my closest friends, as many of you know, I also made lifelong friendships um, and enemies too. Not real enemies, but um, as you know, living in close circuits with people, you get a lot of personalities, and I was a big personality. It taught me now in retrospect how important each of those relationships can be for the future and what bridges burn. Um, while I was there doing my PhD, I had no real clear idea of where I was going. I did not choose to really graduate. I mean, I was doing all my research, publishing, getting fellowships and travel grants and meeting and networking, and it was great. but I thought that would be my life forever. I didn't think of what the next step was until someone reminded me. And I think it was either Teresa or one of my other the other faculty members told me I wouldn't get tenure as a student. And I was like, oh, you mean I have to leave? So I was in graduate school for about 6 years, which is don't do it. That's kind of a no-no, I know. To some people, it was fine. For me, it worked. But so I said, oh, okay, I guess I should leave. So I worked harder to get my dissertation done and made contacts to get a postdoc. Forgot to talk to my mentor about how to search for a postdoc, which is, it worked out for me, but could have been better. She was kind of surprised that I had gotten a postdoc, but it was with, one of her old colleagues, and it was doing some work that was similar, but with humans, seemed like a perfect fit. It ended up being not the best move for my husband and I. Um, it was a very difficult transition. It was really hard to do animal research simultaneously while trying to learn to do human research, which is what I was doing. Again, I was trying to find a way to move away from, I didn't mention this, I was trying to find a way to move away from animal research. It was starting to get to me. Um, so I worked with a group with Jeff Klein at the VA doing rehab with humans, and went to talks, got a fellowship with the VA to do that research, a career development app grant. Um, but I was also doing the human or the animal work, which is just, as any of you know, your main project doing any animal research can take up forever. My humans stopped showing up sometimes. And so that part of the research started to go away. Um, but it ended up being the place that got me the network. The people I met in the human research are the people that facilitated me getting my job at MUSC. And so even though it was exactly 2 years that I was at UF, um, let me back up. So research is good. My husband couldn't find work that was satisfying, or he worked in the beginning and then lost work. And so I told him when we moved there that postdoc's about 2 years. I had no clue. It sounded right? 2 years. Again, this is before I started realizing you're allowed to ask questions and it's good to get information, or I don't know, Google search. I don't know. I just it was in my own world. But at 2 years, he's like, okay, I'm miserable. Can we move? And I'm like, oh, okay. I don't know what to do next. So I went home to my mentor's lab in Texas. Um, Again, kind of doing the same research. I should explain this picture of UF. The best thing I got out of UF, or doing my postdoc, was my godchild who is pictured there. So I made lasting relationships, not only the network that got me to my first faculty position, but lifelong friends. So I went back to Texas. So cross country back to Texas. Many of the same people were in the lab. Some of these people, graduate students, nope, they're not in that picture. Some followed the same path I took with totally different results. So as your first speaker told you, everybody's path is a little bit different. So when I came back, the one thing I did, sorry, the dissertation title is back up there. I brought some of the skills I learned in my postdoc into the lab. Unfortunately, my mentor had also, I forgot to mention this, Teresa Jones, also did a sabbatical at the lab I went to, which was just kind of weird. I can't get rid of her. I love her. Can't get rid of her. It's kind of weird. You want to leave and do your postdoc, and there's your faculty mentor, learning the skills that you thought would differentiate you. Nah, now we all have the same skills. Okay. But I went to her lab. Went back to her lab as a postdoc. Her goal at that time was, okay, we're going to try to get you independently funded. And so she helped me write an R21. She was my co-mentor on that, or co-PI. So was Tim Schallert. I got funded for the R21. And then with that, I got the assistant or the research assistant faculty position. And I then became a co-PI on another collaborator's DOD grant. And then I got an R01. Once I got the R01, that became my leverage where I was being contacted to apply for jobs. At this point, I hadn't really been thinking about leaving. I thought I would stay with Teresa. I mean, she kept following me. I'd stay there. We bought a house. I'd just stay and be, the research guru of the lab. I would be the one that helped Teresa run the lab. I'd still do the research. It was fine. I don't need the big title. But it's really fun when you get asked to apply for jobs, and my ego got petted a little bit, and it sounded fun. And then talking to people, I couldn't not try. And this is why I say it's an unclear path. I basically just blundered through these things. Got the grant, got a job offer with, at MUSC. The people I worked with on the clinical information or clinical studies at UF, they in mass were hired by MUSC to start a stroke center, a stroke research center. They were mostly OTs, PTs, and bioengineers. They worked with neurologists in the stroke center to build this new research consortium that ended up getting NIH funding for a U54. They needed someone that did animal research, but understood or could talk to clinical researchers. And I was a known entity. I think they would have taken Teresa Jones or they would have taken Jeff Klein. They weren't available. And so I was their progeny, their first. So, and I was funded. Ooh, shiny. So I was invited to give a talk. The problem is the department I was going to, they wanted to hire me through, the only place that had animal research. They forgot to invite him into the discussion, but it all ended up. But it ended up because I made those connections early on and didn't burn down any bridges in the process, hopefully. You never know, right? So that's how I ended up at MUSC. I was asked because I was kind of the token rehab person, is how I saw myself. I knew how to train the animals. I knew how to talk to people. I did brain stimulation. That was important. Um, so I was a good fit. It was all for me, it just seemed like circumstance. Nothing that was totally in my control. I wasn't doing anything more special or different than anybody else. There was not a lot of intention. Um, but that's my story. Once I got to MUSC, though, and actually even before this, I had started knowing it wasn't the right fit for me to be a PI. I loved working with the students. I did not enjoy the medical school environment. I did not enjoy the South. But it also, the research, I didn't want to write the grants. It's funny, I work with grants now all the time, but I didn't want to write them. I didn't have the ideas. My creativity wasn't there. I didn't have um, it no longer was a good fit. And I still didn't want to do animal research. And it was really hard. But I had a beautiful group of people that I worked with. And so I didn't want to let anybody down. So I tried. And one of the reasons I put up the information below all my titles, which is weird, is that I tried to feed other parts of my personality by doing other things. So I worked with the graduate students development office. I chaired a research program with the Center of Aging. I tried all these different things to taste what else was out there. I worked with diversity and inclusion programs, did a lot of things with like the Women Scholar Initiative, which was women scientists. And so I tried all these other things, but each of these things I was trying just trying to basically keep myself entertained and showing up to work. I mean, for me, it had gotten that bad. I kept getting grants. I would say, okay, if I don't get this grant, I'll be able to quit. I don't know what I'll do, but and then I'd get a grant because you got to try, right? Um, but it was too much. And then I got too much and I stopped trying as much, in part because I had all these other things I was doing that I liked more. And my chair, who was pretty rough at times, actually said, just personally, looking at all this, it looks like you want something else. Maybe you should think about that. And again, this was before I started asking a lot of questions or asked for help. That was a trigger that I finally said, yeah, I do really want something else. And so I started looking. Well, we don't even care. I'm going to shut the slides off real quick and just talk. Um, so hopefully all of that was just to give you some eye candy while I babbled a little bit, but hopefully something um, that you can take with you. The mistakes I made, not asking questions early on, not asking for help, not talking to my mentor, who I mean, she knew more about my life than was needed, right? She would cat sit for me or vice versa, but I didn't ask her about my postdoc, what I should be doing next. I didn't realize I could. Um, I should have. And a lot of what I got was because of her, um, but was also other relationships I built. And a lot was just happenstance. It just occurred. When I did finally start trying to manage my career and not just let life happen was at MUSC. Towards the end, I started participating in all the career um, offerings that they had on campus for our graduate students. I increased the number of activities that I did both on campus and outside campus to see what fit. I did a lot of volunteer work, and I applied to anything and everything. I The shotgun approach didn't work for me, doesn't work for a lot of people. So then I started doing what I would suggest for anybody who's questioning what they should be doing. I started actually listening to advice from programs like this. I did informational interviews, and that was the best thing I ever did. And what that was is um, I would find people doing a job that sounded interesting, that had something maybe to do with science, some not related to science, everything foundations to I actually talked to and then applied and was interviewed for a job with a spiritual foundation called I just lost it. Never mind. It's not that important. But I mean, they're a little more wooey wooey. But that was the best thing because it's asking people in a 20-minute informational interview, and I'm sure you've heard of these. You basically ask someone, can I talk to you about what you do? You don't expect anything from them except them to talk about themselves. Some were really great, some were not so great. You find out, what do you do on a daily basis? What do you love about your job? What are the skills you need to get to where you are? What decisions did you make that helped you um, leverage yourself as the candidate to get this position? Are you happy with it? You miss what you left behind? I did this with people, everything from I talked to someone at the Allen Institute, I talked to people that were in development, I taught, pharmacy groups. I knew people already in industry, and just talking to them gave me a feel for what I could and could not do, but also what I would want. If it didn't sound exciting or it sounded like more of the same, I wasn't gonna do it. And that is how, during this process, I made the scary decision to email my program officer, the person who at NIH gave me my funding, or not really gave it to me, was in charge of making sure I was doing the right stuff for my grant, and told her she had just left NINDS, asked her if she could introduce me to people at NIH or who I should talk to. I'm interested maybe in joining. And I met my current boss while running a booth for my old position at MUSC. I met with Ernie Lyons, who is the chief of the scientific review officers at NINDS, and just chatted with him at SFN. And he asked me, he said, right now we don't have anything for you, but if you're interested, I'll contact you when a job opens up. He did. I applied and I got it. And I am extremely happy. It was a hard decision to close down the lab, to let go of my graduate students or to maneuver for them and make sure they had money. I had an active grant at the time that I had to turn over to people. It ended up they lost it, which is sad for multiple reasons. Um, but it was like the first time I utilized all the guidelines that books and webinars will tell you to do, like talk to people, make lots of lists, try different things, and it worked. I never in 1,000 years would have thought that I would work for NINDS. Um, I I enjoy it. And granted, I'm behind the scenes, and I kind of think of myself as an overpaid secretary sometimes or organizer. But the fun part is I get to cyber stalk people, read grants from trainees, and go find people that would be good reviewers for them. And so I'm reading people's bios all day long, getting to know other people, kind of doing the stuff I was doing when I was searching for a job. Ooh, what does this person do? What's their research? How do they fit? How will they mold into this group I'm creating? And I think of what I do is kind of building community with a mission that I'm helping guide to help students or trainees. And so in some ways, I see this an evolution of all the things I did like, and but now I can do it, especially since COVID, behind a screen. So I don't have to be out there. I don't have to do the research myself, which I am totally happy about. And I'm not responsible for paying people, which as a PI, you will. If you don't
Uh,
get the funding, it's not just you, all your people, which is hard.
there's a
So
question in the chat.
yes.
It says, it's from Matthew Dale. How did you transition from informational interviews to asking for a job?
Oh, that's the ticket. You don't. You don't want to burn those bridges. It's informational. You ask, if a job opens up, if you can think of me, please call me or, send me an email. If you're really interested in what they're doing or their company or, wherever it is, then it's your responsibility to have it on your radar. Your name will be now a known quantity. When you have 100 applications coming in for one position, name recognition alone might help, right? Um, you can also build up other times to actually build a relationship with that person. Oh, I'm going to be at this meeting. If you're going to be there, can I buy you coffee to thank you for this information, for taking the time with me? And do it in a genuine way. If you don't click, don't force it. That all of us know we've been in situations where you're grasping too much. So I personally, and from what um, other sources have suggested, is don't force, I want a job, right? It's really, what do you do? How can I get there? Can I call you back if I have more information, or can I buy you coffee sometime? Or, you can keep the relationship going, but don't abuse it. Now, they may open the door to say, well, hey, if you're really interested, we have this opening. Would you be interested or something? Um, but if you feel comfortable doing it, then you can. Again, this is a personal thing. You have to kind of fill out the situation.
Can I, sorry, if I can just follow up on that. You said that you did your informational interviews and sat down with your department. Sorry, I can't remember the details. the department head, and then they arranged an interview with you for the NIH grant.
Oh,
Sorry.
no. Sorry. I'm sorry. Let me rephrase that. I can tell I'm babbling a little bit, so I do apologize if I'm not being linear in my thinking. Um, no, so I did the informational interview in person at SFN. I was there representing one of the groups I worked with at MUSC. That's what got me there. I left a booth where I was um, talking about our stroke center, went over and talked to the person that I ended up getting a job with. So my department head had nothing to do with it. I met with Ernie Lyons. He was great. And when a job opened up, which I was tracking on, but he also contacted me. And so that's how that occurred.
So when you met with Ernie, when you said that, he said, "Oh, we don't have anything for you now, but if something opens up, I'll let you know." Was that during your informational interview with him?
Yes, yes.
Okay, but you don't like ask for that. He just offered it. Is
He
that
offered it, yeah. And I mean, you have to fill out the situation. There may be people that you're talking to um, that it makes sense to ask. If something's open, I am interested. I did, after he mentioned it, did say I was interested, right? You don't act coy. But you have to fill that out. There are some people, like some of the people I talked to in industry, it just didn't feel right at that time to say, oh, I'd be really interested in doing this. You just have to fill that out. Some people are fine with it. Um, and some people just don't have the power either, right? So I did informational interviews with people at foundations that were doing something similar to what I'm doing, or a program officer at um, Michael J. Fox Foundation, I think was one of them, or they were doing PR type things. They're not the ones involved in HR at all. And so asking them for it when it makes sense. What you could do is, be honest and say, oh, this sounds really exciting. This is something I would like. Um, so in that sense, you could tell them that you're interested. Now, I'm also one of those people that think being straightforward and asking for what you want is also important. So again, if it feels right, do it. And every situation is going to be different. I know that's not helpful, but I mean, it's helpful in the sense of there is no prescripted way of doing it. Every situation is going to be a little different.
And I thank you. I appreciate the clarification.
So, I mean, really what you're talking about are building relationships with people and trying to find out the best fit. And actually, one thing I want to go back to, even though it's not the path that you're still on, is that when you went to MUSC, it was about fit. It was about what skills you provided, what they were looking for. And I want to point this out to the postdocs that I know as a postdoc, you can look and say, well, there's only so many faculty jobs, even if you do want to be in academia. And I don't have a science paper, so I'm never going to get a job because there's 5 people coming through my department with science cell nature papers. But it's really about the fit of the person and the program. So these interactions, these relationships that you build with people, going to meetings and that your advisor puts you in touch with are really critical, no matter which path you choose, if it is this academic track or if it is something else. So I just want to, you kind of touched on it, but it sounds like, I mean, really you're talking about relationship building and finding out kind of for yourself what the best fit is.
Yeah, and you have to, and it changes.
Yeah.
But I think, yeah, so I don't believe that you should be doing things solely um, to make yourself fit into what you think someone might want, if that makes sense. So when people are looking to hire someone, there are many things that go into their equation that go beyond whether you have a science paper or a neuron paper. Those are great and they can help. And there are some jobs that's going to be their main criteria. But others will be because you bring something special, whether it's because of like my research did this nice little dance between human and animals. And then I met these people. So I was a known quantity. I had been speaking at um, different meetings with behavioral neuroscientists that were interested in the same things. Um, and so I was a fit. You're going to find there are a lot of jobs that are niche like that, that someone's looking to fill out their department so that there's a good spread of expertise, right? And or they're trying to build a consortium of some sort, and you just happen to have the skills that are needed. But it's also up to you. So building relationships, so you hear that, that's part of the networking. That's the talking to people at your posters. That's going to other people's posters and asking questions. And, you know, when you get invited speakers, science speakers, meeting with them and talking with them, it's how you get to know other people and how they get to know what you're doing so that you're at least somewhere in their memory banks. But then it's also important that you know how to leverage that when you're applying, when you're talking to people, when it comes down to the actual job interviews and chalk talks, and getting help. Um, I made some really weird mistakes in my first interviews. Before I got MUSC, I was also recruited for another for sure position. And I was on the top, I was told I was on the final list. Um, and I thought I totally blundered it by asking a really stupid question to one of the guys that one of the faculty members that I had interviewed with. And I was devastated. I went and got help from my mentor to how to handle it, um, and leverage it to not be as devastating as I thought. Um, and part of that is, so I tell that to first say, I am rambling today. Sorry about that. That you can make really big mistakes and feel like you've just lost all your chances, right? And you can recover. But it helps get help and guidance from people who've gone through it. Um, and it's also through that I learn from that how to present what I do in a way that makes sense. Obviously, you guys aren't getting that today, but my skills and my abilities in such a way that I legitimately do fit or don't. I realized through that discourse that I had to get help with is that I actually did not fit with that group as well, because of the reaction. The fact that I had that reaction to them was actually a signal that I should have been listening to. Um, that it that although I could make an argument for the fit for the same reasons that I was hired by MUSC, they were looking for that, but they weren't offering that same the same feedback to me. That makes sense. I didn't. The relationship would have been one way, that I brought something to them, but they didn't give me what I needed. Make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, the fit is a two-way street, right? What you can bring to the table and what how they can support you and how you can integrate with them. So, yeah. All right. I don't know if you have more to go or if there's some more questions.
Leave
people
it
wanna
open
ask.
to questions.
I'm here.
So
Evan, are we doing a postdoc session
Yes.
still afterwards, or you want to just bleed it into the whole question and answer?
No, I think we'll just have we'll have a couple, if there's any general questions that people want to ask now, but otherwise I think we could wrap it up and we can leave the postdocs to a separate session with Dr. Adkins. So yeah, so you'll have time to go into more detail, go through, introduce yourselves, those of you that have not yet met with Dr. Adkins, and if you have specific kinds of questions related to your own position and your own thoughts. But yeah, if there aren't general questions, I'm not seeing anything in the chat. then I will wrap up the recording now, and I will thank you, Dr. Adkins, for your time and for sharing your story with us. It was really informative, and also I think it kind of highlights a lot of the ways that we think about how to help people advance, right? I mean, really, relationship building is critical. Communication is key. Something that is important to stress in science is communication is one of the most important things you can do. Not just related to your science, because you have to be able to write your grants and write your papers and talk to people at conferences, but you also have to communicate, what directions, questions about where you're going and how to get there and solicit advice, and learn how to parse through that and what's the most relevant. So thank
And
you
that does
again.
change over time.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well,
Right. Thank you.
thank you. I'm going to stop the recording now.